Here we are, back again. Episode 42. With you as always is me, Chucky, from the forums, and we've got Jigsaw.
Indeed you do.
Yeah. Another stellar lineup of 5 movies to discuss. What have we got for today's show?
Indeed. We start off with, from 1988, Spellbinder, following that up with the little-known 2011 movie Dano Pass. Then for our action movie of the night, we have Savage Beach from 1989. Then we go back a bit to 1959 with The Alligator People, sort of like a classic black and white monster movie type thing. And then we finish up with the rather well-known April Fool's Day from 1986, slasher classic if you will.
Okay, let's get things started off with Spellbinder from 1988, which is about a man who witnesses a woman being menaced by a man with a knife. He intervenes and discovers that the woman is alone and desperate and has nowhere to stay. So he takes her in, and they quickly become lovers, but soon a cult of Satan-worshipping witches start to terrorize them because they want her back. Now this is a first-time watch for me. I don't even think I ever really heard of this movie until maybe a month or two ago, around the time of Kelly Preston's death, and I saw someone else in another movie group saying, okay, I'm going to watch this tonight. You know, whenever a famous actor or actress dies, some people watch movies in their memory, you know, that type of thing, and that's one that came up. And I noticed the company that released this movie on Blu-ray, they were having a really big sale, so I managed to get it at a pretty good price. So yeah, first time watch for me, and I was actually pleasantly surprised with this one. It ended up being better than I was expecting it to be. Not that I was expecting it to be bad or anything like that, but it surpassed my expectations.
Yeah, so I have seen this one once before. It's probably been about 5 years. I enjoyed it when I first saw it, and I generally enjoyed it now. One thing that really stands out to me is the main star being Tim Daly, who's not necessarily a humongous name, though he was also the star in one of my favorite miniseries, Storm of the Century, which was a 1999 Stephen King written miniseries, and he was the star of that. So it's nice seeing him here about 10 years earlier. I think the story is pretty decent. It, in some ways, almost feels reminiscent of like some 70s satanic movies, because those were all the rage back then. Only this has a bit more of like a high-end, classy feel. Plenty of creepy scenes, some of them are pretty, what am I looking for? Suspenseful. It's not really the best witchcraft-based movie I've seen, but I would say it's a pretty decent movie, and I wouldn't be surprised if most people who watch this will have the same reaction and start finding the movie a bit better than they were maybe anticipating.
Well, it starts off with a basketball scene, so immediately it was speaking to me. I was like, oh yeah, here we go, this movie, oh yeah. But, I mean, this is the type of thing that's quite right up my alley. Even though you can certainly apply this to the horror genre, you can also apply this to the thriller genre. And I'm a fan of 80s, 90s thrillers. Even though technically a lot of them aren't great, I just enjoy watching them. And this had a similar feel to it, but I thought a higher quality production. I think that's another thing about it, is that I was just surprised at the quality of the production of this. I was expecting it to be, or at least come off as a little more low budget, but wasn't the case, so that's good. I thought the old lady played by Audra Lindley, she was a little creepy in this too, especially during I think the beginning warning scene that she gives, where she just shows up at the office. I don't know, something about her face just made me get that old creepy lady vibe, and I thought she was probably the most creepiest part to the movie, at least for me. But there's other scenes in the movie, like that one scene where they're getting attacked at the house and they're all outside the windows and everything, so
Yeah, I'd say that scene right there is probably one of the highlights for me.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely got some good scenes. Even at the beginning, the one little dream sequence where the guy comes out the pantry with the knife, there's a couple of scenes in there to help get your heart beating, I guess.
Yeah, I think if anything for me, the movie sometimes seems like it's a bit sluggish. It's not like a major negative factor, but the movie runs about like an hour and 40 minutes. So there's a few parts in the middle where it may not necessarily be as interesting, but it's okay. Most of the movie has a pretty decent mystery to it, and there's also a little bit of misdirection going on. So I certainly enjoy that aspect, and I find the ending to be a pretty satisfactory conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of movies since then that have kind of borrowed or copied those types of endings. I'm not saying this is the first movie to have that type of ending, but yeah, it certainly wasn't like one of those endings that you're just tired of seeing, at least back in that time.
Yeah, actually, there's a movie from, I think it's either 1972 or maybe it's 73, titled Warlock Moon, which also has to do with Satanism and such, which has a somewhat similar conclusion that this one has.
But the one thing that movie doesn't have is Kelly Preston sex scene.
I'm going to assume you're right. You're probably right.
I mean, I don't know if that was like a body double or anything, to be honest. Don't really care. I got to see some titty.
But she does seem like a decently attractive woman at that time.
It's too bad she had to ruin it all and marry John Travolta.
Oh, see, this is a piece of trivia I didn't know.
Yeah. So look, I'm not a huge fan of satanic witchcraft type movies, but this one, it didn't seem... I don't know, it just had a lot of other things that I enjoy about it. Like, it just felt like a lot of other thrillers that I like watching, usually with some sexy woman in danger, and hey, it has that. I struggle on what I want to give this movie, and I was thinking somewhere between a 7 and an 8, and my rating may change when I next watch it, but for now, I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, so when I first saw this movie, however long ago that may have been, I'm pretty sure I also gave this one an 8 out of 10. I think after seeing it again, I'm probably going to move that to a 7 out of 10, which is my average rating. I think it's still a pretty decent movie. It's certainly... I don't know, there's certainly some scenes in it that you probably won't forget anytime soon. It may not always be the most original movie, but I do think it's a pretty enjoyable movie, and for the late 80s, with mainly, by that point in time, a lot of slashes and low-budget type movies, this one I think stands out nicely. So I think a 7 out of 10 is a pretty good rating for this one.
And I also forgot to mention that there was that one death where the guy catches fire, which is pretty cool as well. Even though it looked a little fake, but it still looked pretty cool.
Yes. I mean, I think for the most part, the special effects were pretty, when they used it, there was like a ton of special effects. Although I really liked the glass scene where they were pushing into the glass, and that was pretty cool looking. But I think they did a pretty good job overall with this one. Speaking of movies that they may not have done the best job with overall, we moved to a slasher movie from 2011 titled Edano Pass, which, if you know anything about the history of cannibalism, is like a historical event that took place in the mid-1800s where some cannibalism went down, all that exciting stuff. Pretty much, these people are going to this guy's parents' house in the middle of the, it's a foresty area, Sierra Nevada mountains apparently. So they go to this guy's house. It's a very quiet cabin type place. There's only 4 people there because this kid didn't tell his parents he was bringing anybody over. But then one of them invites other people over and it becomes sort of like a party type thing, 8-9 people over there. And then, hey, people start mysteriously dying off, and oh my god, could it be the ghost of George Dano? It's a pretty bad movie. So I saw this one once before, Again, this might have been 5-6 years ago. And, I didn't much care for it. It's not like it's a terrible movie. I mean, honestly, for the first maybe 40 minutes or so, it's not great, but, it's okay. But then once the ending comes along, I really didn't care much for some of the aspects that they went with. And I have a few things to say about this one, but, have you happened to see this one before?
Nope. Yeah, so I first watched this just a couple of days ago. The opening to this one was okay, but then it transitioned to a douchey guy in a backwards cap telling the story. And then it kind of just turned into the usual teen bullshit horror movie where, a bunch of teens acting like idiots, drinking, and yeah, some of it was just
I mean, yeah, it was pretty generic throughout.
I mean, they've got this one guy, Derek, who thinks he's such a badass, but he's actually just bad and an ass. So, I think a big part of this is that I didn't really care for the characters, which has a pretty big effect on this particular type of movie, because even though, yes, there is a bit of a killer going on in the background, there's not a whole lot of that. And later on we find out that there's a little bit more going on than just a killer. Yeah, so we're really down to these characters. I'm not saying every single one was annoying, but I think the majority of them were either annoying or just who gives a fuck, So that's probably the biggest part where this movie goes down. Hey, at least they managed to throw some tits in there at one point, so it's not all bad, but yeah, it's not all that good either.
Yeah, the best I can really say about this one is I do like the snowy, foresty setting. The main cabin itself is pretty nice too. So it has an interesting, mildly, vaguely interesting location. But given that most of the characters are unbearable, the situation's deeply annoying. Like, once those guys get to the house, they're like, oh, hey, we can stay here, dude, can't we? And, they just pretty much stay at his house without his permission, so that's fantastic. Despite that quiet guy's, he has a bit of a story to him, but despite what goes on in the movie, I feel like he's one of the most sympathetic characters. Because these other people are just, like you say, just douchey and pretty much dicks, so who cares?
Yeah. And there's also a rape subplot in this movie that just felt like filler. Like it really had nothing to add to the actual what's happening in the movie. It was just there to make the movie more interesting, but it was ultimately unnecessary.
Yeah, I did think it was I would say surprising, but it seemed like something that they brought in for almost not much of a reason, maybe just to make the situation a little more complicated. Because then it's one of the murders actually done not by the killer but by somebody else, and obviously we see how that goes. But I know it's not like the addition added much to the movie. I'm not sure if it really took much away, because it's not like the movie was going to high places anyway.
Yeah, and also like towards the end, there's a situation where I believe the character's name is Mike. I guess he ends up being considered the hero, but he's put in a situation where does he leave his girlfriend to die, or does he try and save her? And he basically leaves. But to be honest, it was a little predictable, because I knew he was coming back. Like that, they tried to create this dramatic scene, which, to be honest, I thought it fell a bit flat.
Yeah, but I thought it's pretty obvious. Of course, if the choices are, hey, leave or stay and try to help. I mean, makes sense if you just look like you're leaving, then you can pop back 3 minutes later and probably be a lot more use.
Yeah.
Which is, hey, exactly how it happened. Spoilers.
To be honest, I don't even really... I mean, I only watched this a couple of days ago, and I've already forgotten pretty much all the kills, except for maybe the axe. Like, there's an axe kill outside.
Was that the hot tub one?
No. Well, I kind of remember what she drowned, or...
I'm not saying the hot tub one's great, but the reason that one sticks with me is just how quick it happens. Basically, we see this guy urinating, and then behind him, we see this guy just come up, boom, and walk away, and while he's taking care of his own business. So I sort of like how they filmed that. It's not enough to make it like, a great kill, but I thought it was, oh hey, that's almost sort of cool.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you're trying to watch a movie with some cool kills, nothing special here. I mean, it's not terribly done in terms of the kills, but a week from now, are we going to recommend anything in this movie to anyone? Probably not.
Yeah, no. I see that on IMDb this has at least a couple thousand ratings, so it might have had an okay, I guess, DVD release when this came out. Maybe they got some people's attention. But I can't imagine this being a movie that, people are going to want to bring a bunch of friends around to watch. Because you can pretty much see the same type of thing in almost any other slasher movie, and half the time it's going to be battered down.
Yeah. It's hard to tell when and where all the people who rated the movie, like when and where they'd seen it, because I watched it on Tubi, and, it's free, so, who knows, maybe a lot of people watched it when it came out, or maybe a lot of people watched it now that it's on a free service. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it's on Amazon Prime too, which is how I watched it. So that could certainly bring some people in. But I mean, with that, I guess my thing is with the amount of choices on any given service like that, it's going to be difficult to pull anybody in a direction to begin with. Yeah, so I feel like if you want a decently based snowy slasher movie, you have plenty of other options. That means you don't need to watch this movie. This is a movie that I bring up every now and again, and I used to get laughed at for. But there's a movie called Iced from the late 80s, which is, it's super low budget, but hey, it's fun. And it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I enjoy fun, low budget slashers, so Iced is a pretty good movie. There's a movie from the mid-1980s titled Satan's Blade from 1984, which has a very similar premise to Iced. And that's another one that's highly recommended, somewhat of a low-budget slasher. So there's certainly some good snow-based slasher movies out there. Dano Pass, despite being a newer movie from 2011, it's just not that good. It's pretty run-of-the-mill, and I can't think of much of a reason to really recommend it. Even if you're interested in the whole cannibalism aspect, there's not really like a whole lot of that in this movie, and what they do have isn't really explicit. So I would say like Cannibal Holocaust or something. So for this movie, I think I'm just going to give this like a 5 out of 10. It's pretty unremarkable, and I can't imagine a situation in which I'd like sit down and watch this one again.
Yeah, I'm pretty much. Yeah, I pretty much agree with all that. I don't envision myself ever caring to come back to watch this again. Look, I didn't have a totally terrible time with it, but yeah, there's nothing there that I would say I enjoyed enough to come back and watch again. Like I said, it actually opened okay. I thought we were going to get a completely different movie to what we ended up getting. I didn't know it would turn into this teen horror thing, but it did, and so...
Were you hoping for more like a Ravenous type movie?
Yeah, well, that's what I thought it might lean more towards, because when I look at it on Tubi, it said it was like a horror western comedy or something like that. Don't quote me on the comedy part, but it definitely said western in there. Yeah, and to be fair, the opening did have a bit of a western vibe to it, I guess, but after those 5 minutes, the movie never really had any of that. So I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 10, and I don't know. I definitely wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I'm not saying if you watch it you wouldn't at least have an okay time with it, but there's just nothing special about this movie.
Yes.
The next movie for today's show, Savage Beach from 1989, which is I believe it's the 4th movie in the 12 series of movies that we're watching. Now this one is it's got the same DEA agents from the previous movie, and they're flying cargo, and they have to make an emergency landing on a remote island in the Pacific where there's several different bad guys or different people who are looking for this World War II gold treasure. And as you can tell or expect, things happen. You get some action in more ways than one. But, yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's not a whole lot more to say. There wasn't already said when we watched the previous one, Picasso Trigger. But I think this one had a little less continuity than the previous movie did. And maybe that hurt it just a little bit. Not a whole lot, because when you go into this type of movie, you know what you're getting. You're getting some hot women, you're getting some action, you're getting some crazy but also silly generic type bad guys or plots, and yeah, it's a movie that's a bit all over the place. And to be honest, a lot of the movies in this series are, but you can kind of just enjoy it for what it is and not expect anything more than what you've already seen in the previous movies.
Yeah, so I happen to think this was slightly better than Picasso Trigger, if only because I thought portions of Picasso Trigger were somewhat convoluted. There's just a bunch of characters, a bunch of plot lines. This one seems a lot more streamlined, which may not necessarily make it feel like a amazing movie, and it's not. But I mean, it's not as good as How Ticket to Hawaii anyway. But it's, I think it's, based on the movies I've seen from this guy, it's probably my second favorite so far. I did really hate the whole subplot about one of the agents having a father who disappeared during World War II, and oh hey, this just happens to be a guy who might know something about that. Oh boy, that's exciting.
Yeah.
But I did think it was interesting dealing with some gold and treasure being stolen from the Philippines, then them trying to find the treasure. So I mean, that was sort of interesting. It's just, I mean, like Chucky said, much of this stuff is stuff that you've seen in other movies. Women. I do like the idea that they crash landed on the island, and a few hours later they're like skinny dipping in the ocean because hey, why not? That's perfect. Secret agent. I guess one of them's a civilian, but that's perfect behavior. So I just, it's just the type of thing you'd come to expect from these types of movies.
They gave us what we wanted. Well, yeah, like towards the beginning, they've got this like hot tub scene. There's like 4 women in the hot tub, and then eventually they bring in the saxophone music, and yeah, mwah, that's beautiful filmmaking right there.
That actually got me to wondering, because now obviously I've not seen this guy's movies before, so this is a first time watch for me. But I wonder if he's ever going to have a, just a normal female character, but just have her be a lesbian. I wonder if that's ever going to happen, because so far all of these really hot women have been completely heterosexual, and he had a gay guy once in his first movie, or the first movie of this series. So I just sort of wonder if he's ever going to do something like that. That'll be at least mildly interesting.
I guess we'll see. We've still got 8 more movies.
Yeah, I know. Should be a fun ride as ours.
One of the things that disappointed me a little bit, and I mentioned this in the previous movie because I brought up the topic, like, who are the favorite characters or favorite women of yours in the movie, and mine in the past too has been Edie. She's not in this movie, so that kind of sucks. But I mean, there was another brunette that came in who was, I mean, look, all of them pretty good looking, but sometimes my eyes lock on certain ones, so there you go. But yeah, I do know Edie does come back, or at least the actress does, in some of the other movies, so I'll be looking forward to that. But I think that hurt this one a little bit, at least for me personally, just because they didn't have her in it.
Yeah, I think one of the, when it comes to, I guess the quote-unquote highlight of this movie, the conversation where they get the title of this movie from, it just sounded so unnatural. They're talking about a ship that had gold in it and how it crash landed on an island. Like one of the women said, it hit such a savage beach. Which, it didn't sound like a natural type of dialogue. And it just seemed, hey, let's throw that in because, hey, that can be the name of the movie. And it just sort of cracked me up a bit when that scene came on.
There is some impressive innuendo, though, in the movie. Especially this one scene where they're talking about a gun. Like, I don't remember exactly what the exchange was, but they're like, "Ooh, are you able to handle this big gun?" And she's like, I don't care so much about size as I do performance. And they go back and forth like a little too long to the point where it's just so comical. But
yeah, but how about when it shoots? It's like,
yeah.
oh. Even I was mildly turned on by that, so there you go.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, look, if you've seen any of at least the previous two movies, I don't think you'd be too disappointed in this one, even though it may not be the best.
And I do think that there's quite a bit of action. It takes a little while, but once everybody hits the island, there's a decent amount of action toward the end too. So it's out somewhat generic, but it can still be a bit of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, so this one, look, it's certainly not the worst one out of the first four. I think I would still prefer to watch this over Malibu Express, just because I just prefer the late 80s feel to this one as opposed to like Malibu Express. That was, I believe, mid 80s, like 85, something like that. But like I said in the earlier reviews, that movie felt almost 70s-ish for me. So it just didn't speak to me as much as the movies from the 80s, or the ones that feel like they're from the 80s. So, to be honest, I'm not sure if I would say I prefer this one over Picasso Trigger. And like I said, that's mainly to do with some of the characters. But it's still more or less very similar to that, so I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I think when it comes to this guy's movies, they pretty much, aside from Malibu Express, which was certainly the least enthralling out of all of them, they've all been pretty much around the same. I liked How Ticket to Hawaii the best, but I would even call the one a quote-unquote gold movie. So I'm thinking just giving this one a 6 out of 10. It's okay to watch. It's just, low-budget action movie with a bunch of naked women. So, I mean, you can't really go wrong with that. So, I mean, it's just not a great movie, but then again, given this guy's past movies, that can't really be that much of a surprise. So I feel like a 6 out of 10 is, a pretty fair rating.
Yeah. And if you're a teenager, there's plenty of fun to be had with these movies.
And if your teenager is 10, it's cool, guys.
Yeah. Watch a movie with pants on.
Speaking of movies that have people wearing pants, which is most movies, to be sure.
Yes, I did notice that most people in this movie were wearing pants.
We come up with the somewhat atypical, at least atypical for us. From 1959, we have the Alligator People, which pretty much, if you've seen any older horror movie, this woman had an experience that she recounts during almost like a psychiatric session, about how her husband went missing. Then she went to search for the husband and finds out what things he was involved in, some type of medical experiments, and then the horrors that she faced during that. Yeah, so The Alligator People is a movie that I've only seen once before, and it was 12 years ago. So I was definitely excited about seeing this one again. And it's not like it's a fantastic movie, but it's very reminiscent of all of the late 50s sort of sci-fi horror type movies. If you've seen The Fly, the original The Fly, this movie's almost, at least from a story structure, just the same as that. Only The Fly was in color, this one's in black and white. But I still think the movie looks pretty nice. I think it's a decently fun story. I mean, you know where it's going, but I think it's a decently fun story. There's certainly some scenes that I think stand out, and I actually generally find this a pretty enjoyable movie. But then again, I'm a big fan of 30s, 40s, 50s horror. So that's my perspective. Let's see what some of these perspective is who maybe this movie is a bit out of place. What do you think, Jackie?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't do a whole lot of these older movies, and mainly that's because it's just not something that generally enjoys or entertains me. So I thought we'd do this one. Just, I felt like every now and then we probably should do one, and who knows, maybe I'll eventually come across one.
Keep throwing Jiggy a bone.
Yeah, and maybe I'll come across one that I actually surprisingly enjoy. Now look, I mean, this one, I didn't have a bad time with this one necessarily. I think it's still limited by a lot of the things that prevent myself from giving good ratings to older movies. The fact that it's black and white doesn't really have anything to do with it. We can get new movies in black and white that I enjoy, but I think it's more of just, back in that day, a lot of the movies have very similar types of musical soundtracks in the background, and they're limited with the effects and everything. It's more of a limitation thing, and even though I could rate it based on the limitations, at the end of the day, I just compare a movie to a movie regardless of what limitations it had, because ultimately it comes down to, did I enjoy it? And even though I think the story is pretty intriguing, like it's a good idea, especially back in the 50s, it's a bit out there. I mean, there are some things in the movie, like some alligator shots and things like that, which are pretty cool as well. I think still some of the effects and the music and things like that, they're things that I think of and I'm like, I just can't stop thinking about it. And it's not cheesy enough to be funny, but it's also, you can, like for instance, the guy with the hook hand. You can clearly tell it's a guy just holding on to something with a hook on the end of it, and that's that type of thing. And like at the end, there's the crocodile man at the end, where you can clearly see he's wearing a mask. I mean, you can see at the behind that it's a mask.
Yeah, that may not have been the highest, the best special effects up to that point, because like I said, this movie reminds me a bit of The Fly, and the original Fly movie actually had pretty decent special effects, and this movie clearly, it's more on like the Attack of the Giant Leeches type level, which is another late 50s horror movie. I will say one thing that really appeals to me about this movie
is the 20th Century Fox logo and music at the beginning.
Well, hey, I have to admit, just seeing any type of beginning of a classic movie, no matter what company it is, always makes me be happy. Like I was, from the get-go, I was like pumped for this one. But it's actually the I may have mentioned this in my review for Hatchet, but I always thought swamps were underutilized settings for horror movies. I thought there was such potential for a swamp-based horror movie, and there's not that many out there. And this one, of course, takes place in a pretty swampy location, bunch of crocodiles, snakes, alligators, that type of thing. And I thought it brought a new feeling to the movie that some other horror movies got really good. I mean, there's a scene where she's chasing after someone, yelling, the guy's name in this rainy night, and it's nighttime, it's like swampy, there's all these animals around, it's like all this slime and mud and muck and stuff, I enjoy that. So, I will say the setting for this movie makes it almost a bit more unique than it otherwise might have been, because the story itself, it sort of reminds me, this is a movie that came out, I think it was 1953, it might have been 1954, but it's a movie titled The Maze, and the whole basics of The Maze was this woman looking for her husband who just, disappeared, and she goes back to the family estate looking for the husband. So it's pretty much the exact same thing as this. And like I said, the whole Fly comparison too, because of the whole scientific stuff going on. So, I mean, the story itself may not be too unique, but both the setting and I think a lot of the performances, including even as hokey as it looks, the guy with the hook on his hand, being Lon Chaney Jr., or the Wolfman, to people who know that movie. And of course you have Richard Train and Beverly Garland, who did a bunch of somewhat low-budget horror movies in the 50s and 60s. I mean, it's not like, the movie itself may not be great, but there's a lot of small things in this movie that make it, at least for me, a somewhat enjoyable experience.
Yeah, when you're talking about the swamps, there was one scene I think where the woman was out and about and at nighttime, and she was like just walking around with alligators right next to her, which I thought was pretty impressive. I'm not sure exactly how that was filmed, but I would have expected a woman to be more being very difficult to film that kind of scene.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm assuming some of that was shot on location. I assume much of that was shot on location. I just don't know where that would be.
I couldn't tell if it was like just some good trickery or not, or if she was really just walking around with some alligators.
I mean, you can certainly tell from some of the scenes in this movie, such as this guy gets electrocuted toward the end of the movie, and it just looks pretty ridiculous. So there's some difficulties when this movie is trying to do like tricky scenes. There's even like one in the beginning where they hit an alligator, and the way it's shot just looks really really off. I would imagine those were either like I know however they did that, I think it at least looked decent.
I actually noticed this throughout. There was I guess it's fitting to bring this type of thing up now, based on everything that's going on in the world, but I noticed there was multiple black servants in the movie, and I guess it's a bit of how things were at the time, but that just really resonated with me to see that every black person in the movie was playing basically a servant.
Well, the unfortunate thing is, because I've seen a bunch of these older movies, it used to be, I'm talking like 1920s, 30s, and into like the mid-40s. When they had African American actors in movies like this, it was almost always for comedic effect. Like there'll be like a cowardly, guy who's always scared jumping at like the slightest shadow. So at the very least, they used these actors to slightly battle impact. I like the idea of this old Southern woman telling her black servant to go tell a drunk white guy to stop shooting. That sounds iffy. Yeah, it seems like it might just lead to a potentially dangerous situation, but hey, this was a different time, as you can tell.
It reminded me of this one scene in a movie called Dance Flick, which I'm sure you haven't seen, probably have no desire to see, but there's one scene in it where Marlon Wayans, who's a very popular black actor, it's a comedy movie making fun of other movies, and there's this one scene where he's like picking cotton in a field, getting whipped by this guy, and he's like, "Oh, I like my job, I'll pick the cotton." And I don't know, it's just one of those scenes that immediately I thought of, and I mean that scene is funny in that movie just because it's played to be funny, but yeah, just seeing there's at least 3 people in this movie, I think, who are playing some form of servant type role.
Yeah, there was the guy on the train who was like just handing out messages to people. Then there was the 2 house servants, and none of the characters were really all that important to the actual story too, which is another common trait with African American actors and actresses back in those days. Like you could pretty much take them out of the movie and it wouldn't make any difference.
And then they had like I don't recall what his title was. I guess is sort of like a doctor. He was wearing his Colonel Sanders uniform. So that was nice.
And actually, speak on a topic related to that guy. Near the beginning of the movie, when the woman gets off the train and she sees this like radioactive material, this cracked me up. So I'm sure the radioactive material, which is in like a crate, is safely in that crate. But she just sits down on that crate. Like I wouldn't be sitting anywhere near radioactive material if I could help it. But she just sits down and waits for someone to come pick it up. So. That's a brave choice there.
Yeah.
I think that this one, it's not as good as movies like The Fly, which obviously The Fly was a high budget movie, plus it had Vincent Price in it, plus it was in color. So there's a lot of things that The Fly did that this movie probably wasn't able to do. But I think this movie had, I thought it had a pretty good vibe. I like the swampy atmosphere, the setting. The story itself is, a bit generic, because you see a lot of it coming, and obviously, as some of the special effects, the main one that people probably look at, the alligator head, they're a bit awful looking, but even those have the charm. So I'm thinking that if you liked The Fly, if you like some of the older 50s, sci-fi, horror type movies, and you haven't seen this one, I mean, it's not like it's a bad movie. So, I'm personally going to give this one a 7.5. I enjoyed seeing it again, and probably round it up to an 8. I can imagine watching this in the future with no problem, having another good time with it, because that is how Jay rolls.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give it a 4. And look, before all the pitchforks come out from the people who are listening to this and, they have an interest in movies from the 50s or just any older movies in general, look, I'm not the person to be listening to if you want a genuine opinion on a movie from the 50s. So, even though I give this a 4, I will say, look, out of the movies that I watched from the 50s, this is probably slightly above average for me. So, my rating could potentially translate to a 6 or a 7 out of 10 for someone who actually, enjoys movies from the 50s. And like I said earlier, I'm just someone who sees all the limitations of the music and the effects and all those things, and I don't know, I just can't get past those types of things to truly enjoy these movies, I guess. If it was like the crocodile guy at the end, the fact that you can see he's wearing like this crocodile mask, I mean, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. Like, it could be like one of those movies where you just kind of laugh at how silly some of the things are, and you can kind of laugh at that, but for the movie to be good in that kind of way, that would have to be more of a consistent thing happening throughout the movie, and it's not.
Yeah, I will say some of these movies back then had the idea that if you build things up until the end and just show it once, it would be more impactful, which obviously sometimes doesn't really work out that way.
Yeah, but I will say, I believe the character's name was Paul, but that guy is the 1959 Ditch That Bitch world champion when he managed to ditch her on the train. That was beautiful. Mwah.
Yeah, and that guy was Richard Crane, who's an actor who's been in, he's been in a bunch of stuff in the 30s, 40s, 50s, so he's always a fun guy to see. He was actually born in Indiana, too, on a fun side note, which is, if anybody's wondering, who gives a fuck about Indiana, I live in Indiana, so.
It could be your next door neighbor then.
Well, he died, like, in 1969, so.
Wow. Okay. Maybe he's buried in your backyard. I almost forgot this movie was 60 years old. So,
so you're just like about 60, 70 years out of place, but that's okay. Speaking of jokes and April Fools, what's the last movie we have?
Yeah, so last up for today is April Fool's Day from 1986. Which is about a whole bunch of college students who stay at a friend's remote island mansion where they begin to fall victim to a murderer over the April Fool's Day weekend. And I won't go too much more into what happens, because if I do, it probably spoils a lot of this movie. And I think this movie is quite infamous for being... Well, there's certain twists in the movie, especially towards the end, where I think the movie has divided its audience. Some people are like, oh, that's great, what a great twist. And then there's some people who just feel gypped. Because, well, look, if I told you why, that might spoil it. But for me personally, the twist, I'm actually kind of on the fence about. I don't really care one way or the other about it too much. Now, this movie, I saw it for the first time, I can't recall exactly when, probably 15 years ago, something like that, mid-2000s. I definitely don't recall seeing it back, in the 90s or anything like that on VHS, so this was my second time watching it, I believe. The first time I watched it, I don't even know if I finished it the first time I watched it, but this time, yeah, watched it through. I had an alright time with it. And yeah, it just... Man, it's so hard to review this without trying to give something away. Maybe I'll let you speak on it a little bit, and maybe that will help inspire some of my thoughts.
Well, I'm not much of the inspiring guy, but I appreciate it. So, April Fool's Day is one of those movies that I have enjoyed since I first saw it, and I've enjoyed it many times since. I've probably seen the movie like 6, maybe 7 times now. I always get a kick out of it. I love the multiple character interactions, because you have a bunch of characters on this island, and some of them are just so goofy. But I don't know, I just watching it, even though in like the long scenes when nothing horror happens, just seeing these characters interact, I just have a fun time with it. It helps one of them is Amy Steele, who was also the final girl in Friday the 13th Part 2, so it's nice to see her here. It's somewhat light on violence, and there are some reasons for that. But, you do get some suspenseful scenes. There's a scene where these guys are making love in a boathouse type thing, and this corpse floats by. That's sort of creepy. Toward the end of the movie, it's like a, rainstorm going on. It's a dark night. They're just, in this house, and they keep finding bodies. So it has, other things that you would expect from an 80s slasher. Now, by this point, this is 1986, they were getting, it's a bit far removed from the, slasher hits of the early 80s. So, I'm just happy this one had a decently authentic feel, at least to me, to the early 80s movies, things like Happy Birthday to Me, and some of the slashers of the beginning of the decade that were really good. So, I've always enjoyed this one. I can't foresee a situation in which I don't enjoy this one. I enjoy most of the characters. I just think it's a fun movie.
Ditto. No, I don't. Look, I'm sure you enjoy it more than I did. I think this is a movie I'm going to have to see so many more times before I really can explain how I genuinely feel about it. But for the time being, look, I had a okay to decent time watching it this time. I think knowing how it ends, I don't know how that's going to affect my future viewings, though, because, like, when I first watched it, like I said, I can't recall if I actually ever finished watching the movie. So, and if you talk to people on the internet who talk about this movie, you know that even though they might not explain exactly what happens, there's, like, this twist or twists at the end that some people applaud it for and some people dislike it for. So when I watched it again, I didn't exactly recall what that twist was or what happened. So as it got towards the end, I was just before it happened, I kind of guessed what was going to happen. So and now that I've seen it, I don't know if that's going to affect watching all the earlier scenes again the next time, because I was thinking, like, they did eventually explain this at the end, but as soon as you find out, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it and you don't want it spoiled, maybe mute the next 30 seconds. Okay, once they find out it's all just a prank, and, they find out that, okay, it's not really a twin sister, it's, someone playing or pretending to be an evil twin sister, I immediately thought, okay, but doesn't that make almost every other scene in the movie pointless? Like, to the point where, why would there be scenes between, like, private scenes between other characters who are supposedly in on this, and, they're acting as if they're not in on it. And like I said, they do explain it, okay, after they had been messed with, then they were made aware it was a joke. So, okay, yes, that does make a little more sense. But, so even though that is explained, now that I go back and watch it again, I'm always going to know, these people aren't really being attacked, or not intentionally.
Yes. So, there was a slasher movie from '86, which I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's titled Slaughter High, which, I think it's a pretty good movie. It's somewhat infamous for having a really terrible ending. I'm talking about like a really bad ending, and some people go as far as to say that the ending, which somewhat invalidates a lot of what happened in the movie in the same way that this ending did, somewhat ruins the movie. I mean, at the time, in movie universe, all of them think that something is, happening that they need to be really worried about. So, I mean, it's like, in the moment, as long as they think they are in danger, which they clearly do, it just, I don't know, to me, I just don't see an ending like this being a giant, like, negation, giant negative to the movie as a whole. Looking at a movie like Slaughter High or April Fool's Day, and then, just judging the movie based off the ending, I mean, I don't know, I understand it, but if you were enjoying the movie before you got to, like, the last 5 minutes, there's not that many situations I can think of in the final 5 minutes that would deeply impact the first 85 minutes. If it makes you feel any better, though, apparently this movie was remade in 2007 with looks like a majority African American cast, so maybe that'll be more to your liking.
I did remember renting that on DVD around the time it came out.
It has a 2.8.
Yeah, I do recall it was not very good. And I can't recall if it followed the exact same outcome as this one does. I don't want to say I'll have to watch it again to find out, because I don't know if I want to be doing that, but I'm sure at some point I'll probably have to see it.
Did you have a favorite character in this movie, out of interest?
Maybe just the one chick who said she fucks on the first date. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think I actually really like the beginning to this movie. See, that's again, I just think it's fun. Oh, I'm O'Mary or Riley or Tool. It just, I just have a lot of fun with it. I enjoy the Southern Texas guy. I really want to plow your fields. Can't blame that guy for trying.
I like how he said that, and then immediately after he like totally fucks up with the well. I'm pretty sure that was the well scene, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and like he immediately screws himself out of all those cool lines that he just spouted out. He's starting to get into her pants, and then immediately he like fucks everything up and drops the bucket. Then yeah, and then kind of acts like a little bit of a pussy because he won't go down to go get it.
Yeah, well, that's business people for you. Actually, another thing I like about this movie is that sort of it's a bit of a what am I looking for? A montage of all these like pranks happening. Like doorknobs falling out and cigars that blow up and light switches that if you just flip it off another light comes on. It's just like a fun little scene, but I always enjoyed it, and again brings a little more levity to this type of movie. So, April Fool's Day is generally, I feel like it's generally decently well liked. It may not make people's like top 15 slasher movies from the 80s, but I always enjoyed it. I always had a pretty fun time with it. And like I said, I can't really foresee a situation in which I don't like it. I enjoyed it, so I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10. And I'll probably round that down to an 8. But it is a slasher movie from the 80s I always enjoy, so hopefully you do too, because my taste is superior.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 7 for now. Look, I had a decent time with it, and like I said, I'm going to have to watch this probably a couple more times before I truly know how I feel about it. But, yep. There was enough fun in here to keep it entertaining, I thought. And like I said, the twists at the end, I didn't so much mind those. It's nice to have something a bit different to what you would normally get if they had just kind of played it straight. But yeah, there you go. The song at the end, the Too Bad You're Crazy song at the end, is kind of fitting, just, a bit of a silly song to a bit of a silly movie.
Yeah, actually, so background, behind the scene type information. I was actually late to get into the show because I was, late to watching this movie. So as soon as the song came on, I'm like, oh god, I forgot it has this song in it. And usually I would sit through at least half the credits just to get me a vibe of what music they play, because I sort of like doing that. But the song obviously fits for the movie. I just find that some of the obnoxious song. So I'm like, oh god, and as soon as it gets there, I just like turn the movie off. So there you go.
Yeah.